The draft collective investment schemes, temporary recognition and central counterparties, Transitional Provision Amendment, Regulation 2024.
Is it the wish of the committee that the instruments be debated together? That's agreed. So I will now call the Minister to move the first motion and speak to both instruments. At the end of the debate, I will put the question on the first motion and then ask the Minister to move the second motion formally. I'll call the Minister to move the first motion.
It's a pleasure to serve under you, Mr. Betts. I beg to move that this committee considers the draft collective investment schemes, temporary recognition and central counterparties transitional provision amendment regulations 2024, and with the leave of the House, I shall also speak to the draft insurance distribution regulated activities and miscellaneous amendments regulation 2024. The regulations we're introducing today will ensure that the regulatory framework for financial services is aligned with the UK's needs following our exit from the European Union. They ensure that UK businesses and individuals can continue to access the products and services that they need even when these originate from outside the UK, and that UK authorities have appropriate control over which firms can access our markets. They also ensure that the statute book is clear, comprehensive and relevant to our domestic market. First, let me turn to the collective investment schemes and central counterparties instruments. UK investors and firms rely on a wide range of financial products and services to meet their needs, ranging from individuals saving for a rainy day all the way to multinational corporations needing to settle multi-million-pound transactions. In a highly international industry, many of these products and services originate from outside the UK. Ensuring continued access for UK investors and business is therefore critical to the continued functioning of our economy. This instrument deals with two such areas of global market access: the ability of collective investment schemes or funds to market to UK retail investors, and the ability of overseas central counterparties to provide services to UK firms. I will now speak to each of these in turn. The government previously introduced a new route for overseas funds to become recognised for marketing to UK investors, the Overseas Funds Regime, which the Honourable One will be familiar with. And in July of this year, the first equivalence decision under this regime came into force. This means that certain retail schemes from the European Economic Area will be able to market to UK investors on an ongoing basis. And funds from the European Economic Area has been able to passport freely into the UK prior to the UK's exit from the European Union. And a temporary regime was introduced to allow these funds to continue to do so. These temporary arrangements will end in December next year. The overseas fund regime represents a more permanent solution. However, it will take time to transition funds, the over 8,000 funds with temporary access to the new regime. Therefore, this instrument that we're speaking to today extends this temporary regime for a further year until 2026 to allow for a smooth transition and to avoid any cliff edge risks. It's important that the temporary regime continues to work as intended for those funds still using it, namely those funds not in scope of the government's equivalence decision. At the same time, we're conscious that the temporary regime should wind down in an orderly fashion, and this means that funds in scope of the equivalence decision should be directed towards the overseas funds regime, and if they fail to apply or become recognised under that route, should lose their ability to market freely to UK investors. This instrument also makes technical changes to ensure that this is the case and that sub-funds within the temporary regime are treated appropriately depending on their characteristics. These two changes combine to ensure that the government's decision under the overseas funds regime and the transition from the temporary arrangements will be implemented smoothly without unintended consequences for investors or fund operators. Let me turn to the second set of changes delivered by this SI in relation to overseas central counterparties. Central counterparties, or CCPs, are vitally important market infrastructure firms that help markets safer and more efficient. They sit between the buyers and sellers of certain financial instruments, providing assurance that contractual obligations will be fulfilled. The process of transacting through a CCP is known as clearing, as the Honourable Member knows. During EU exit, the government set up the Temporary Recognition Scheme, or the TRR, which allows overseas CCPs that were recognised by the EU before the end of the transition period and therefore had market access to the UK to continue to provide services to UK firms. This allowed UK authorities at the time to start putting in place longer-term market access arrangement for those overseas CCPs after EU exit. The TRR has largely functioned well and ensured that EU exit did not disrupt the provision of clearing services into the UK. However, as it stands right now, a CCP within the TRR automatically loses its right to remain in the regime if its EU recognition is withdrawn. This has meant, since EU exit, several CCPs have exited the TRR and moved into the UK's accompanying run-off regime as a result of decisions taken by authorities outside of the UK. There are a variety of circumstances which could lead to the EU authorities withdrawing EU recognition from overseas CCPs, but these circumstances may not always be relevant to the UK. For instance, EU recognition has previously been withdrawn because cooperation arrangements has not been agreed between ESMA and the relevant national regulator of the overseas CCP. This statutory instrument therefore removes continued EU recognition as a condition for remaining in the TRR, and this, combined with the bank's continued ability to move a CCP out of the TRR for financial stability reasons, ensures that our country authorities have appropriate control over which overseas CCPs can provide services to UK firms. Thank you for bearing with me, Mr. Chair. There's a few more things I need to speak to. I'll now turn to the Insurance Distribution, Regulated Activities and Miscellaneous Amendments Regulation 2024. The UK financial services sector is central to growing growth in the UK economy, as we discussed in the Chamber yesterday, and insurance is a fundamental contributor. Effective and proportionate regulation is absolutely key to this, we believe, and therefore we must ensure that domestic regulation is clear and not burdensome to understand. This statutory instrument makes technical legislative changes that remove or amend references to insurance-related EU directives. It is no longer necessary to refer to them now that the UK is not part of the EU, and now that regulatory regime for insurance distribution is set out entirely in UK law and regulator rules. This instrument amends the Terrorism Act 2000, Proceeds of Crime Act 2002, Counterterrorism Act 2008, and the Money Laundering, Terrorist Financing and Transfer of Funds, Information on the Payer, Regulations 2017. It replaces Insurance Distribution Directive-related references with references to the equivalent provisions in the Financial Services and Markets Act 2000, Regulated Activities Order 2001. This instrument makes similar amendments to the Financial Services and Markets Act 2000, Regulated Activities Order 2000 itself. It also changes the monetary threshold in Article 72B of that order below, which a person whose main business is not insurance distribution is excluded from regulation by the FCA. This instrument provides that the threshold will now be denominated in sterling rather than euro. The scope of the exclusion on the distribution of sterling-denominated insurance policies will no longer be dependent on changing exchange rates. Finally, Mr. Chairman, this instrument removes references to regulations made under the Insurance Distribution Directive from the Financial Services and Markets Act 2000, Qualifying Provisions Order 2013. These provisions gave the FCA powers to investigate and remedy breaches relating to the Insurance Distribution Directive, powers which are no longer required now that the directive no longer applies in the UK. These amendments made by this instrument may be technical, but they are important, Mr. Chairman, in bringing the statute book up to date. Failing to make them could cause confusion as to the relevance of EU law to domestic regulation. So in closing, Mr. Chair, these SIs make mostly technical changes that are necessary to ensure that our statute book remains up to date and adequately reflects the EU's exit from the European Union. They also make important provision regarding the provision of services into the UK, either by ensuring that UK firms and investors can access the products and services that best suit their needs, or giving UK authorities appropriate control over which certain services can be provided. I hope that the committee will join me in supporting these regulations, and I commend them to the House.
The question is that the committee has considered the collective investment schemes, temporary recognition and central counterparties, transitional provision, amendment regulations 2024. Opposition spokesperson.
Thank you.
Mr. Garnier.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Mr. Efford, for chairing today's meeting. These are. So thank you very much to the Minister for going through quite a lot of detail on what is highly technical stuff. We welcome the changes on this side of the chamber. They continue the important work started by the previous government to ensure that our legislative framework is fit for purpose after Brexit, removing redundant EU references and aligning our investment fund regulations with UK priorities. We are streamlining oversight and maintaining stability in our financial markets. And more interest in the industry will be in the clarity given in extending the temporary marketing permissions regime before the rollout of the overseas funds regime. And as I said, we absolutely welcome these changes. I did have a couple of questions. I think some of them perhaps well, let me go through them. So first, with the application process for the funds. We're introducing landing slots for UCITS funds transitioning from the TMPR to the OFR regime. So what steps is the government going to be taking to ensure that fund operators are fully prepared in order to be able to and supported to meet the deadlines to avoid any disruptions? And I think the other thing which I think is quite important for the future of the city and the growth agenda for the city is reciprocal access. Whilst this is all about allowing access for European operators to come into the UK post-Brexit, what measures will the government be doing? And this may be a wider point to do with, as I say, the growth agenda. But what measures will the government be doing in order to try to get reciprocal access for UK products to be able to market it in the European Union? But aside from those two questions, Mr. Efford, we're very happy with this and we will be supporting these measures.
Yes.
I sincerely apologise. I've been messaging with the other Clive about the Mansion House oral statement, and that's why he was on my head. But of course I apologise for getting your name wrong initially, and I hope it isn't held against me in the future. I'd like to thank the opposition spokesperson for his points. He knows this area well, and I'm glad that he supports the work that we're doing. We will keep an eye on the timeline, as he says, but regulatory and supervisory frameworks of both the UK and other jurisdictions can change over time. So it's important that government monitors this. We will be keeping an eye on it. And we want to ensure that the changes that happen in the UK and regimes in the EU and other overseas regimes are compatible with the existing equivalence determinations with an outcomes-based approach. So he's right to say it's important for the growth of the financial services sector. I have already taken proportionate steps to monitor any changes over the time pertinent to existing equivalence determinations, but I will keep an eye on the deadline, as he says, and the wider growth. The FCA has made the process very clear for funds, and it's working closely with the firms as well. And further exact timings can be found on the FCA's website. I'm also happy to write to him if he would like. And then all UK equivalence decisions are taken on their own merits, following a technical outcomes-based assessment of the other country or the territory's regulatory and supervisory regime. So the government will make equivalence decisions when it is in the UK's interest to make them. I'm sure he's aware of that. But any decisions regarding the granting of equivalence decisions to the UK are a matter for the European Commission. However, I did meet Commissioner McGuinness, the outgoing Commissioner, and I have plans in the diary to meet the new Commissioner, but this is something I am going to raise when I go, because I do think it's important for the growth of the financial services sector, as he says, and for the wider economy. Apologies once again, Mr. Chairman. I hope you found the debate informative, and I hope you'll join me in supporting these regulations.
Yeah, I was on your every word. The question is, the committee has considered the draft, the collective investment schemes, temporary recognition and central counterparties, transitional provision, amendment regulations 2024. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
The draft insurance distribution, regulated activities and miscellaneous amendments, regulations 2024.
Minister to move formally.
Formally.
The question is that the committee has considered the insurance distribution, regulated activities and miscellaneous amendments, regulations 2024. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order.